So I'd like to welcome David for our next conversation, which I think every organization has data. Every organization is thinking through what to do with their data. And I think even within that, the next kind of core component that we're going to talk about is this world of data. And so maybe as we get started, David, I'll pass to you if you want to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about what you're working on, as well as maybe from an OCC perspective, give us a little bit of background in terms of some of the data and some of the estate that you're focused on, and then we can jump in.
Sure. Hi, I'm David Hoag. I'm the CIO at Options Clearing Corporation. If you don't know OCC, what we do is we process all options on equities. So when you buy a put or buy a call to be able to, at some future date, buy or sell your underlying stock, we are the clearinghouse that guarantees the performance of those contracts and does all the transaction processing and keeps the market integrity intact. And so, data is really the lifeblood. The data we get from pricing vendors, the data we get from the exchanges, the data we get from our customers, all of that gets pulled together and eventually used so that we can do an excellent job at managing the risk of the market as a result of the trading activity that's going on.
Excellent. So I'll kind of divide the world a little bit between what I'll call internal data and external data. External data, I'll consider that really focused on customer, on business operations. Internal data is maybe a little bit more about efficiency, about process, about employee. As you kind of look at that world and maybe help me understand a little bit of how you see kind of the delineation happening within the organization. Is data explicitly a CIO conversation for you? Is it more of a CDO, a chief data officer conversation? Is it a chief marketing officer conversation? What are the components, and how do you look at where the ownership and responsibility for data kind of flows into your organization?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'd say historically, OCC spent a lot of time focusing on external data, the feeds coming in, the customer processing, the guaranteeing of our trades on a day in and day out basis. And given that it was a strong business function that for which we maybe do risk management or regulatory reporting of those trades, a lot of our business users have a firm grounding in the data, I'd say, that drives our business. This data, their understanding of it, we've got quantitative analysts who sit on our risk management team who crunch the data and look at trends over time. We track data from, how is volume affecting our performance and our SLAs? How do we guarantee uptime of our system? So that's the traditional, I'd say, external data flowing into OCC and how we process it. But I venture that the last several years, has really been more of a focus now to the internal data that informs our business, around the efficiencies, around the effectiveness, and how do we organize and manage that data with the same level of discipline and quality controls and checks that we've done historically for our customer base? How do we bring that kind of mindset to the business that informs how we run our business? And that's been an evolution for us. So at first, you start to look at it and you see, wow, there's all these disparate sources. There's all this information, and everyone's trying to answer the questions on their own. And the opportunity emerged for us to say, well, look, if we start to pull this information together, one, we'll get more consistency in the insights. As you know, if you look at data in isolation, you can get a wrong picture or a wrong view of how something is. And you really need contextual. What's the inputs? What's the outputs? What's the other data that might be informing what the ultimate insights should be? And so by pulling our data together, we're starting to improve the insights and ultimately then the decisions making we make as managers to drive the organization.
I've heard some interesting analogies being made around data, and I think it's interesting, maybe even parallelizing a little bit of the evolutionary context that we keep talking about. I'm curious, do you have a particular direction or perspective on it? And what I mean by that is, I've heard of the concept of data as oil. It's the refining process, it's the production process. You create these wonderful, great things that now power the organization and do something incredible. My problem with that, and it was pointed out to me actually, I think it was the CIO of Janssen Pharmaceuticals who said it. He said, the problem with that is oil gets used and then it's done, but that's not really how data works. And in fact, data is more like music, right? You kind of have all of these different notes and combinations that normally alone would mean nothing, but when you string them together, you can remix them, you can do all kinds of stuff with it. Is there a parallel to some of the work that you're doing? Do you look at data as music? Is data more like oil? Is there another category or another kind of analogy that works within your organization?
Yeah, I think music is actually an equal option. And the reason I say that is, go back to my comment about all the silos of data within an organization. It's as if you have a bunch of people who know how to play a musical instrument, and we throw them in the room together and they all start going. If you've ever heard an orchestra warm up, this is what it sounds like. Right? It's all this noise, it's just chaos. Everyone's playing, but it's not really synthesized, right? Turning data into insights is that weaving that tapestry that turns that data into music that you can now make informed and educated decisions from. And that's not trivial. I think that we think just having the data is enough, and too often I find organizations, they tend to look at what they have and they go, okay, well, now this is what I can know because this is what I have. Instead of saying, let's step back. What is the real insight or question I'm trying to answer? Now, do I already have this data and is it woven together to tell the story? Or more often than not, here's the big gaps. We're missing a guitar. The music doesn't sound right. We can't really tell what this is supposed to be like because we're missing a critical contributing instrument to this music, as you put it. And that's, I urge organizations to focus on the business questions you're trying to answer, and is the data actually giving you the insights you need to those business questions, and don't inform how you act based off the data you happen to have at the ground level, because then you're not really getting the music.
That's a good transition point. And what I mean by that is, I think there's this concept of big data, right? And to me, big data almost says we don't actually know what questions we want to ask of it. When I look at small data, it's very much, I want an answer to this. I know exactly what, guitar, to your point, I need to put into it, right? When you look at big data, you kind of don't know the answers to the questions. Are you guys experimenting? Are you down the path of a maturity curve on big data, machine learning, whatever the buzzwords of today are? What does that mean for you and for the OCC, and where do those types of things play into your strategy?
We process millions upon millions of records a day, and we have million instruments that we do the processing for. So big data is part of our vernacular in context of how do you mine and do risk analytics, for example, on literally millions of portfolios across the United States. And so being able to tease out the important information from that scale of data is how we're using big data right now. I think machine learning is an interesting concept in a organization like ours, where you have to prove your work a lot and explain, well, why did you get this result? Why do we think this is the right answer to that equation? Not saying that we won't cross this chasm, but today with machine learning, you kind of end up with a black box. Here's the historical evidence. Based off of history, the machine learning figures out what the neural network should look like in order to make the same type of decisions or recommendations based off of the historical evidence. And you kind of trust on not necessarily knowing how it got to it, but you've got evidence that it consistently produces the right number. In our world, where I feel that might come into play is more about identifying where the potential anomalies are. So you're streaming through thousands of records or millions of records with millions of portfolios, trying to figure out where you need to put your analysts towards to determine if there's really an emerging problem that we need to be in front of, or is everything okay? And big data and machine learning can be that thing. Instead of someone scanning graphs for anomalies, hey, look over here. We're not sure something's wrong, but bring a human to bear. Shine a
find
spotlight
the
on
place
it.
where you can start to look. So I think oftentimes I hear of stories where something unusual, something out of the ordinary that you find with data that you wouldn't have expected, something unexpected ends up happening. Do you have anything that was an interesting experience, anecdotally, anything that kind of came up where data within the organization told you something that was counterintuitive?
An interesting observation that I had in looking at trends of transaction volumes, right? As things grow over time, markets are highly variable. Sometimes they're very volatile. Sometimes they're very quiet. And I was tracking this data of transactions over time because you got to size your systems, make sure you have capacity and you can handle any future volatility. And looking at that information, what I started to observe when I have multiple years of information is I could take a ruler and put it on the peak transaction volumes, and I seem to hit, regardless of whether the next peak was 3 months away or 1 year away. It was linear in nature. That your next peak, based off of elapsed time, would achieve on point X. No one would ever have guessed that you could do a linear projection of what future capacity needs might look like. And that was a surprise that the data told us, and it's been useful for sizing our systems.
Yeah, I think, volatility is certainly the name of the game in today's market, it would seem. So by all means, I think you guys are going to have a safe business for quite some time, and hopefully all the data will tell you as much as well. Any bold prediction, anything, I'll call it, really far out there, something that's completely, out of the ordinary that you see 5 years from now, 10 years from now?
I'd say that, there's a lot of challenges to the financial industry, and I don't think we have. It was a bit of an event horizon going on right now. What's it going to look like post COVID? What's it going to look like post the funding system that we have in place? And there's people who feel digital currencies are the future. There's people who feel we've got a massive issue associated with the debt loads, and then there's modern monetary theory. And I'll be frank, I don't pretend to be an economist. But I tell you, I think the way things have been, we're up for some radical changes as we look forward, but I can't tell you what they are.
That's okay. Neither can the economists. They'll pretend to, too. Thank you so much, David. Really appreciate you taking time to chat with us today, and I will look forward to all of those predictions in the future, whatever they may be. But thanks so much.
Thank you so much. You have a good day.
Excellent.